Walking through the desolate mountains where foxes and rabbits thrived, the man with the sword strapped to his back suddenly stopped in front of a tombstone. He walked up beside the tombstone, which stood in front of a small dirt mound, and squatted down next to it, removing the weeds that were growing around it and revealing its true appearance. The characters on it had already become fuzzy, and only less than half of it could still be deciphered. The man sighed and said, "The divine Tao is collapsing, and the ritual and music system is flourishing. The battle between the 100 schools of thought is about to begin." When the man stood up, he saw that his disciple, who was still yet to become a formal disciple of true martial mountain, facing the direction that they had come from. Blood was seeping from Ma Kuxuan's mouth, ears, and nose, causing his tanned face to appear especially wicked and terrifying. He used his forearm to roughly wipe his blood away before continuing to stare in that direction. "Ma Kuxuan, according to the excuse you gave me before, you wanted to head over there because of that young girl from the outside world. You told me that she teamed up with the prince and eunuch from Great Sui Nation and used her flying sword to kill your first master. You told me that this left a knot in your heart, so you needed to find her to exact revenge. I felt like your request was reasonable, so I didn't stop you from going. I allowed you to take control of your own life and death. After all, being able to encounter such Tao enemies is both a danger and an opportunity for us cultivators and martial artists." The man's voice became solemn, and he showed no signs of being lenient on his disciple just because he was talented. "However, you targeted the young boy from Clay Vase Alley instead. Why? I already told you before that martial artists from true martial mountain, especially swordsmen, definitely shouldn't attack and kill innocent people for no reason." Ma Kuxuan sidestepped the question, and he instead replied with a question of his own, asking, "Are martial artists most able to ignore karma and preordained fate?" The man nodded and replied, "Casting one's gaze through several thousand years of history, those who are able to use their own strength to turn the tides of a time are indeed mostly sages from the martial sect. I'm not saying this on purpose simply because I'm a martial artist as well." The man kept his gaze on Ma Kuxuan, not planning to let him shrug off his question. If Ma Kuxuan were a bloodthirsty person who enjoyed preying on the weak, why would he accept such a disciple for true martial mountain? In mortal empires, martial artists relied on fighting on the battlefields to raise their cultivation base. This was a dangerous method that kept them on a tightrope between life and death. Once they lost control of their true selves, it would be extremely easy for them to fall into demonic ways. At that time, just how easy would it be for these martial artists who held profound military power to massacre cities and destroy nations? The martial sect and the Confucian sect were the two towering pillars that held up the mortal empires and ensured peace. If a revered and powerful martial artist went down the wrong path, then the higher their cultivation base and the higher their position, the more damage they would be able to inflict on a mortal empire. There were many bloody lessons recorded in the history books. Just how difficult was it to win over public opinion? And just how easy was it to lose public opinion? Even though this was a remark made by a Confucian sage, there was no shortage of martial artists who had earnestly studied Confucian teachings. They all deeply agreed with this remark. Perhaps Ma Kuxuan noticed the increasingly heavy atmosphere. However, he wasn't in a hurry to explain himself, and he lightly cupped an ear with his hand. This strained his wound, and it instantly caused him to suck in a deep breath and grimace in pain. He relaxed for a moment before putting his hand down and looking at the puddle of blood on his palm. Only at this moment did he say, "He's called Chan Ping'an, and his father died when he was still very young. Before he passed away, that man was a famous potter in the small town. He was extremely good at his craft, and he was also a very honest person. However, he suddenly died one day, and his corpse was never found either. Even though my grandma never admitted to it, I can still clearly remember the booming thunder and pouring rain from that night. I was woken up by the thunder, and I discovered that my grandma wasn't by my side. When I opened the door a little, I saw my father stealthily running over with delight and fear on his face. That was a very strange expression. My mother kept patting him on the back, and she couldn't wipe the smile from her face. She was truly beside herself with delight." Ma Kuxuan unconsciously frowned as he tried to recall that bleak memory, and he continued, "Only my grandma remained silent, and she didn't look too happy either. Not only that, but she even scolded my father angrily, saying, Do you think she'll marry you just because her husband died? Why don't you take a piss and use it as a mirror to look at yourself? The Chun clan from Clayvase Alley has only had a single child for many generations. So aren't you afraid of pushing all three of them to death? When this branch of the Chun clan vanishes because of you, aren't you afraid that their ancestral Yin god will look for you to seek revenge? Taking 10,000 steps back, are you truly not aware of that woman's personality? Are you not aware that she'll never remarry? My father wore a sheepish grin at that time, and he probably thought that he had committed to it already and was soon about to obtain his reward. So he didn't pretend to be remorseful or sorry. In the end, my grandma pointed at my mother and viciously scolded her. However, my mother doesn't have a good temper either, so the two of them almost got into a fight in the main hall. My father is the type of person who's fond of the new and tired of the old, so everyone in the neighborhood disliked him at the time. He naturally helped my mother instead of my grandma, and in the end my grandma sat down on the floor and beat her chest in grief. She lamented to that plaque as she cried, and she said that the Ma clan had accepted a huge troublemaker in my mother into the clan. She cursed them and said that they would die in discontent and regret. After listening to Ma Kushwan's explanation, the man asked, "You want to collect the intangible karma from their evil deeds for yourself? You wish for your father and grandma to eventually die in peace?" Ma Kushwan grinned and said, "I truly don't have any feelings toward my father and mother. However, I can't help but worry about my grandma. She's not willing to come to True Marshall Mountain with me, and she said that she definitely has to be buried next to Grandpa when she passes away. So, if she goes to the distant True Marshall Mountain, she'll definitely have to burden me with a trip back to the small town in the future. Moreover, she heard others say that one would have to traverse a difficult young path after they died. And she certainly didn't want to experience this after experiencing so many hardships while still alive." "That's understandable," the man said. "However, you're still in the wrong. Only this once and never again, understood?" Ma Kushwan pursed his lips, a cold expression on his face. He didn't shake his head and talk back, but he didn't nod and agree either. The man smiled and poured more salt on Ma Kushwan's wounds, saying, "How did it feel to be held down and beaten by someone the same age as you? If Chun Ping'an hadn't pulled out a fucking dagger, how could I have lost to him?" Ma Kushwan replied indignantly, "From the beginning to the end, I only used 70% of my strength. If I wasn't trying to toy with him." The man chuckled in ridicule and said, "Toy with him? Spare me. Was your plan not to kill him with 70% of your strength so that the young girl would underestimate you? And then you could kill her as well afterward, hitting two birds with one stone? Quite ambitious of you." Ma Kushwan's face flushed slightly red. However, he remained stubborn and he said in anger, "Just whose master are you?" The man roared with laughter. The two of them set off again, heading toward the small town. Compared to Sun-Scorched Mountain, is True Marshall Mountain taller or shorter? Ma Kushwan asked. The man smiled and replied, "Do you want to hear the truth or the lie?" Ma Kushwan raised a brow and said, "What's the lie?" "They're around the same," the man replied. Ma Kushwan sighed in grief, and he felt like he was truly unfortunate when it came to meeting new people. His first master had mysteriously died in Dragon Riding Alley, while his second master wasn't very powerful, yet had a whole heap of rules. The man smiled and continued, "On the surface, Sun-Scorched Mountain is one of the fundamental sects of Sword Dao. However, in the minds of cultivators from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, its status is far inferior to that of its nemesis, Wind Lightning Field. As a result, Sun-Scorched Mountain isn't regarded as a first-rate sect. Of course, this is only a false appearance, and in reality, Sun-Scorched Mountain has an incredibly strong foundation. It was only because of that conflict that they seem weaker than they are. At that time, there was a swordsman from Wind Lightning Field whose skill with the sword far exceeded the others in his generation. He was far too dazzling, and his brilliance forced Sun-Scorched Mountain to endure hundreds of years of humiliation. No matter how much you talk up Sun-Scorched Mountain, that still won't change the fact that True Marshall Mountain is inferior to them." Ma Kushwan snapped. The man chuckled and said, "Ma Kushwan, you're mistaken. The gulf between Sun-Scorched Mountain and True Marshall Mountain is approximately the size of another Sun-Scorched Mountain." Ma Kushwan faltered upon hearing this, but he quickly understood the meaning behind these words. He immediately smiled and said, "That's more like it." The sect is the sect and you are you, the man reminded the young boy. Ma Kuxuan chuckled and said, You're also mistaken. What I mean is, since True Martial Mountain is so tall, it will be much easier for me to find people to spar with when I become more powerful in the future. At the very least, I won't be surrounded by a bunch of weaklings and fools. The man smiled in reply, saying, Will these words be more persuasive if they're spoken by that young boy from Clay Vase Alley? Just what kind of master are you? Ma Kuxuan said in anger. Be careful that I won't exact revenge for you if you're killed in the future. The man reached behind himself and patted the scabbard of his sword, saying with a faint smile, Apart from this sword, I have no other relatives. If I'm killed, what's the point of seeking revenge for me? Isn't there still True Martial Mountain? Ma Kuxuan asked with a puzzled expression. True Martial Mountain is different from the other sects in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. You'll understand when you get there, the man said. The tiger talisman hanging by his waist shuddered softly. The man held his hand over it for a brief moment before saying in a solemn voice, Hurry, we need to return to the small town. We martial artists are able to seek fortune and avoid calamity, and we're also able to predict the near future. This is almost instinct for us. Ma Kuxuan rolled his eyes and said, Even if the small town has descended into absolute chaos, with the outsiders and the residents fighting until a sea of blood forms, what has that got to do with me? Let me get this straight. I can agree to not kill innocent people, but I definitely won't go out of my way to help others either. The man wore a solemn expression as he grabbed Ma Kuxuan's shoulder and commanded, Don't speak. Hold your breath. The two of them disappeared with a flash before immediately reappearing almost 50 meters away. This process repeated again and again, and their disappearing and reappearing motion appeared much like the stones that Ma Kuxuan skipped across the creek. Die. Apart from being grazed on the back by the stone thrown by Ma Kuxuan, Chen Ping'an hadn't actually suffered too many injuries. However, this definitely didn't mean that he felt fine and dandy at this moment. The most troublesome wound was still the one on his left palm, especially since he had slowed down its healing by submerging it in water while wading through the creek to collect snake gall pebbles and catch fish. Exchanging that punch with Ma Kuxuan just then had further exacerbated the problem. When Chen Ping'an removed the cotton strips, the only thing he could do was retrieve a porcelain bottle from the pouch on his waist and ingest its contents. This was naturally herbal medicine he had brewed according to the prescription that he had obtained from the Yang family's medicine shop all those years ago. Its only effect was to suppress pain. After taking back her ancient-looking skirt dagger, Ningyao sliced a large strip of cloth from her sleeve and cut it into strips. After wrapping them around Chen Ping'an's wound, she asked the young boy who was drenched in a cold sweat, Is the folk medicine from the Yang family's medicine shop really effective? Chen Ping'an lightly waved his left hand and squeezed out a smile, saying, It's very useful. I was genuinely in pain just then, and I've only experienced such agonizing pain 2 times before. Even the bones in your hand were visible. How could you not be in pain? Ningyao scolded. Do you think you've attained the Vajra body of Buddhist arhats? Or perhaps the untainted physiques of Taoist true lords? Who forced you to act brave? Who forced you to fight Ma Kuxuan one-on-one? Didn't he want a duel? Sure thing. He can fight the two of us by himself. What's wrong with that? Even I don't find that embarrassing. Yet you've become addicted to playing the hero, haven't you? I know, why don't you challenge the old ape from Sun-Scorched Mountain to a one-on-one battle as well? And I'll even continue to clap and cheer for you. Chen Ping'an was just about to interject and explain his reasoning to her. However, Ningyao immediately glared at him, so he could only nod and say, Yes, you're right, Ningyao. Ningyao shot a sideways glance at him, saying, Your mind doesn't agree with your mouth. You think I don't know. Chen Ping'an chuckled upon hearing this. Meanwhile, his gaze remained fixed on the skirt dagger in her hands. At first glance, this skirt dagger appeared small and adorable. Upon closer inspection, however, one would realize that it was razor-sharp and cold. Chen Ping'an felt like this skirt dagger was the complete opposite of its owner. Ningyao told Chen Ping'an to raise his right arm, and she gently placed the skirt dagger back into the saber scabbard that was tied to his arm. Don't push your luck, and don't have any ulterior thoughts about this dagger, she said in warning. Ningyao, you're overthinking things, Chen Ping'an replied in exasperation. Ningyao suddenly pointed at the statue of the Taoist enforcer with broken arms and said, "Do you know what stone that ink-black statue base is cut and made from?" Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, "Of course I know. Ningyao, you've asked the right person. If we follow the creek and venture deeper into the mountains, I estimate that we'll need to walk for at least half a day. We'll arrive in front of a black stone cliff that's entirely made from this kind of stone. It's extremely solid, and even striking it with a hammer won't cause any damage to it. That's to say nothing of striking it with a hatchet or something. There are also several grooves in the cliff face, and the stone is at a fairly large angle inside these grooves. They're not smooth or even either. Every time old man Yao and I walked past this place, he would get me to sharpen the hatchets on the cliff face. And let me tell you, the hatchets would truly become glistening after a good sharpening. They would appear completely different from before." Ningyao pinched her brows, not knowing whether to laugh or to cry. Using it to sharpen hatchets for hacking trees and chopping firewood. Chen Ping'an's eyes lit up and he exclaimed, "It's valuable? No matter how valuable it is, are you able to obtain even a small piece of stone from that large cliff face?" Ningyao said with a huff, "I'm telling you, even ordinary immortals can't do that. Of course, that's unless they're a powerful sword immortal who's also willing to sacrifice a divine weapon. If that's the case, they might be able to hack off 2 slabs of stone that each measure approximately 9 meters in length. Sword immortals also have a special name for these slabs of stone, dragon-slaying platform. Each slab will be worth as much as an entire city." Chen Ping'an fell into deep thought. Ningyao's eyes suddenly lit up and she said, "Isn't there a ready-made sword whetstone under the feet of that Taoist enforcer statue? It's fairly big. And it looks like we can cleave it into 2 slabs of dragon-slaying platform." It was as if someone had lit a flame under Chen Ping'an's bottom, and he hurriedly said, "Ningyao, we definitely can't break it off and take it home. That Taoist enforcer has already suffered enough, so if we steal its base as well." Ningyao suddenly stood up, humping coldly and saying, "Steal? Am I that kind of person?" Chen Ping'an followed Ningyao as she walked up to the statue of the Taoist enforcer. Standing before the colorful statue, Ningyao took a step forward before placing her hands on her scabbards in a gallant manner. She then looked up and shouted, "I'm Ningyao. If you're willing to give me your 1-meter-wide base today, I'll repay you 100-fold or even 1,000-fold when I become a sword immortal in the future." Chen Ping'an's jaws dropped. Would this really work? Sure enough, the statue remained silent and unmoving. However, Ningyao didn't give up and she continued, "So you're not willing to give it to me? Then what about lending it to me? That should be fine, right? I'll make sure to return it to you." Ningyao didn't forget to turn to Chen Ping'an, blinking and saying, "I'm borrowing it, not stealing it, understand?" Chen Ping'an furiously shook his head, replying with a sincere expression, "I don't understand." Just as Ningyao was about to explain the huge difference between the concepts of stealing and borrowing to the stubborn Chen Ping'an, she suddenly heard him shout, "Be careful." As he shouted this, he had already dashed forward to drag Ningyao behind him. As it turned out, the statue, which had been lashed by the elements for hundreds upon thousands of years, had finally reached the end of its life at this moment. It fell forward and crashed to the ground, disintegrating into pieces. It shattered very comprehensively, and there was not a single piece of it that was still identifiable. In fact, even its head and large beard disintegrated into dust. From the earth it had been sculpted, and to the earth it now returned. Its journey in this world had come to an end. Even more mysterious than this was the fact that the height of the statue was far greater than the distance between the 2 youths and the statue. Logically speaking, this should have resulted in Chen Ping'an and Ningyao being flattened by the collapsing statue. At the very least, they should have been brutally struck. Interestingly, however, the remains of the collapsed statue only reached as far as the 2 youths' feet. The well-traveled Ningyao gulped when she saw this, feeling a little guilty. Looking down at the remains by her feet, she mumbled, "How stingy of you. Just say no if you don't want to lend it to me. Is there really a need to sacrifice yourself to attempt to kill me?" Chen Ping'an suddenly shook his head, saying, "This is called a nodding bodhisattva. It agreed to your request." Standing shoulder to shoulder with Chen Ping'an, Ningyao looked at the remains of the statue in front of them before looking further away at the lonely slab of black dragon-slaying platform. In the end, she turned to Chen Ping'an and asked in an uncertain voice, "Are you sure?" "I'm certain," Chen Ping'an replied with a smile. Ning Yao believed him, with not even a shred of doubt remaining in her mind. Even she didn't know why this was. Afterward, Ning Yao followed Chen Ping'an's guidance and swept the scattered remains of the statue into a pit that they had dug. They then covered it with a layer of dirt. Chen Ping'an lowered his head and quietly chanted, "May you rest in peace, no matter whether you're a human or a god." Ning Yao also lowered her head and quietly said, "Rest in peace." After doing all this, Ning Yao asked in curiosity, "Chen Ping'an, is this a custom of the small town? Is this something passed down by your ancestors?" Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, "No, it's not. It's just something that I came up with." Ning Yao raised an eyebrow. Chen Ping'an smiled and asked, "Ning Yao, don't you feel very at ease after doing this?" Ning Yao shook her head and replied, "No." Chen Ping'an scratched his head. He looked at the black statue base and asked, "That's called a dragon-slaying platform?" Martial artists might refer to them as saber whetstones or sword whetstones, and only swordsmen will refer to them as dragon-slaying platforms, Ning Yao replied. She turned around to gaze toward the southwest, and she appeared to be in a trance as she said softly, "The people in my hometown also referred to them as sword whetstones. Everyone owned a piece, be it big or small. Usually, it would only be the size of a fist. However, there are some swordsmen whose clans have declined and whose cultivation bases are low, so their sword whetstones are only the size of a thumb. Even so, they still value it more than their own lives. My family also has a sword whetstone, a very big piece." "How big?" Chen Ping'an asked softly. "Even bigger than your house in Clay Vase Alley," Ning Yao murmured in reply. Chen Ping'an was astounded. An expression of envy then spread across his face and he said, "Ning Yao, your family is so rich. Moreover, since the sword whetstone is so large, you don't need to worry about others stealing it either. How nice is that? Unlike me, after working hard to earn some money, I feel worried no matter where I hide it." Ning Yao had been feeling slightly sad thinking about her hometown just then, but her sadness instantly vanished at this moment, and she said with a smile, "Let's split this sword whetstone into two and take half each." Chen Ping'an waved his hands and said, "What would I need it for? I do have a machete at home, but that won't require such a valuable piece of saber whetstone. My heart will ache each time I use it, so what's the point? Ning Yao, I reckon you should just take the entire thing." "Oh, that's right, didn't you want to ask Master Ruan to forge a sword for you? You can use the other half of the saber whetstone to pay for that." "Chen Ping'an, are you genuinely stupid? Or are you scatterbrained?" Ning Yao said in exasperation. Chen Ping'an pondered this for a moment before smiling and saying, "Ning Yao, just pretend that I'm a foolishly kind person." Ning Yao suddenly pointed at Chen Ping'an, a look of realization on her face. She smiled with squinted eyes and said, "Chen Ping'an, be honest with me. Do you have ulterior motives? Are you thinking that everything will still be yours after you make me your wife? How very calculating of you. Very impressive." Chen Ping'an grimaced, and he was truly on the verge of tears at this moment. What was the phrase that Song Jisun said before? "He who has a mind to beat his dog will easily find his stick?" Ning Yao roared with laughter and exclaimed, "I'm just joking. Look at how terrified you became." Chen Ping'an couldn't help but sigh. His mind was truly feeling a little tired at this moment. Ning Yao's expression suddenly became serious and she said, "Be careful. My flying sword is already returning." Chen Ping'an suddenly became tense, and it was as if he were facing a great enemy. After nearing the small town, the martial artist from True Martial Mountain let go of Ma Kuxuan's shoulders. Ma Kuxuan was slightly dizzy, and after giving his head a shake he asked, "What's going on? Did someone from my family get targeted? Perhaps an outsider took a fancy to one of our family treasures, but my father or uncle was unwilling to sell it. Yet, the outsider insisted on obtaining it, so my family suffered just like Lu Xianyang." Walking briskly with Ma Kuxuan behind him, the man shook his head and replied, "That precious sword scripture was part of the reason why the mountain-moving ape from Sun-Scorched Mountain was willing to break the rules and act so resolutely. However, the most important reason is the animosity between Sun-Scorched Mountain and Wind Lightning Field. If Chen Songfeng from Wind Lightning Field hadn't come to the small town, Bai Yuan definitely wouldn't have chosen to act in such a way. Even if the cultivators from the outside world want to target someone in the small town, they won't dare to act too brazenly. At the end of the day, the sage overlooking this place. The man suddenly stopped speaking, and he looked at a rooftop in the distance. There was an ink-black cat squatting there, and upon seeing Ma Kuxuan, it immediately started to meow in a high-pitched voice. When Ma Kuxuan saw it, the wild cat turned around and started to sprint away, heading toward Apricot Blossom Alley. Ma Kuxuan's face instantly became as pale as a sheet, and he furiously sprinted after the wild cat on the rooftops as if he had gone mad. Having figured out the situation, the man breathed a sigh. He was unhurried as he followed Ma Kuxuan, and the distance between them remained constant the entire time. Ma Kuxuan ran back to that extremely familiar alley. When he saw that the courtyard door was wide open, the courageous young boy surprisingly came to a stop. He didn't dare to walk inside. He knew that their courtyard door would almost never be open for long periods of time. This was because his grandma held a certain belief. Apricot Blossom Alley was filled with poor and unmotivated people, yet their family was especially rich, so it would be very easy for others to covet their wealth. Because of this, they needed to keep their doors firmly shut. Otherwise, they would definitely be targeted by thieves. The rims of Ma Kuxuan's eyes were red as he walked into the courtyard. The door to the house was also open. Ma Kuxuan saw a familiar figure, that skinny and feeble figure, lying on the ground. The black cat meowed in a shrill and eerie voice as it sat on the doorstep. "Don't go over." The man reached over and placed a hand on Ma Kuxuan's shoulder, saying, "What's done is done. You need to maintain your composure." Ma Kuxuan forcefully held back tears, and he took deep breaths as he slowed down his footsteps. "Grandma," he called softly. The man walked over and squatted down beside the old lady, placing 2 fingers under her nose. There was no sign of breathing. The black cat hurriedly ran into the house in fright, disappearing in a flash. The man pondered for a moment before looking up at Ma Kuxuan, who was still standing outside the door. "Don't come over. Your yang energy is innately concentrated, so if you come any closer, any remnant wisp of your grandma's soul will be destroyed by you," he warned in a grave voice. There was a deep frown on Ma Kuxuan's tanned face. However, he forcefully stopped himself from crying. The man reached a decision, and he grabbed the tiger talisman hanging by his waist and said in a solemn voice, "Mr. Qi, this matter can't be swept under the carpet. You have your rules, but I also have my considerations. I hope that you won't interfere in a while." After saying this, the man's aura suddenly underwent a drastic change. His clothes fluttered and his hair billowed as he quietly recited an obscure and arcane mantra. In the end, he finished by exclaiming, "At the request of true Martial Mountain." Ma Kuxuan looked over in a trance. What he saw was a 3-meter-tall deity in golden armor descending from the heavens. The deity beat its fists against its chest before asking in a thunderous voice, "Disciple of true Martial, what is your command? Mystical abilities are prohibited in this place, and I'm not well versed when it comes to capturing souls either. Thus, I've summoned you here to ask for your help in searching around this house. If you find the wandering soul of this old lady, please collect it for me. And remember not to damage her essence." The deity in golden armor paused for a brief moment before nodding its head and replying, "As you command." The golden light vanished, and so too did the deity. In the office of the kiln supervision official, Chen Songfeng from the Dragontail County's Chang clan was currently sitting in a spacious room and busily flicking through records. There was a large crimson-colored wooden box beside his feet, and over half the wooden box was filled with yellowing books and records. Chen Dui casually grabbed a book from the box before walking over to the window and slowly going through it page by page. The elderly steward of the official residence was also present, and he was enjoying some tea as he sat on a chair somewhere in the room. Lu Baqiao, a swordsman from Wind Lightning Field, sat opposite the old man and politely chatted with him. The spirited and energetic old steward smiled and remarked, "What a fortunate coincidence. The Li clan's Li Hong personally visited the official residence a while ago to ask for the records of the different branches of the Chang clan in the small town. However, he only wanted the records up to 300 or 400 years ago. Master Song agreed, so I let Li Hong take 70 or 80 books that were sitting on top of the box. The box underneath is even older, but the ancient records inside it are coincidentally what you're after. In fact, If there wasn't an official requirement to bask these books under the sun every summer, they would have already been chewed into bits by the insects. Standing beside the window, Chan Dui didn't look up as she said in an indifferent voice, "I've heard that the descendants of the Chan clan in this small town have all become servants and maids for the 4 surnames and 10 clans in Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley. Some of these people have even become generational servants who forever kneel and kowtow to their masters. However, they still act in a haughty and proud manner when they come across ordinary residents of the small town." The old steward wore an awkward expression. Chan Dui spoke of the 4 surnames and 10 clans. Yet the eldest grandson from the Dragon Tail County's Chan clan, a powerful and wealthy clan that had existed for over 1,000 years, was obediently sitting there and going through the records like a servant. Meanwhile, she was surprisingly relaxed and acting as if this were only natural. Even using his kneecaps, the smart old steward could work out just how noble and high-ranking she truly was. Even though none of the old steward's servants or workers came from the Chan clan, he did indeed have decent relationships with the powerful clans in the small town. Thus, he didn't want to make a mistake regarding this matter and accidentally provoke this powerful and domineering outsider. With this in mind, he carefully contemplated his words as he put down his teacup with cracked ice patterns. "Miss Chun, there's nothing much I can do about this," he began. According to an elder in the office, there were originally 2 branches of the Chun clan in this small town, with the 2 of them having different ancestors. One branch moved out of the small town a long time ago, and they didn't leave any descendants behind. However, I vaguely remember others mentioning that they especially assigned some graveyard attendants when they left. However, that was far too long ago, so it's already impossible to verify which clan was responsible for taking care of the Chan clan's graveyard. As for the other branch, they also used to be one of the most powerful clans in the small town. In fact, they were among the top few clans. However, the world is impermanent, and after a few internal and external struggles, they gradually started to decline. This has especially been the case for the past few hundred years. Just like you remarked, Miss Chun, they're indeed becoming increasingly incapable by the generation. And today, there are already no more independent families from this branch. Oh, hang on. I just recalled that there is genuinely one lone person who's still independent. He's very likely the only member of this branch who hasn't become a servant of the 4 surnames and 10 clans. That child's father was an extremely skilled potter, and he was even commended by 2 previous kiln supervision officials. This is why I still remember him. However, he died very early, and I have no idea how his child is doing now. In any case, based on what I've seen and heard, the people in this small town treat the descendants of the Chun clan fairly well overall. This is especially true when it comes to the Song clan and the Zhao clan, and even the head stewards in their residences are from the Chan clan. They're masters and servants in name, but they're almost like family in reality. After revealing all this ancient history about the Chun clan, the old steward picked up his cup to take a sip of tea. Chan Dui smiled and said with a nod, "Steward Shui, you're a very smart person. No wonder the kiln supervision office is able to run so smoothly." The old steward smiled and replied, "You flatter me, Miss Chun. I'm simply aware of the limits of my capabilities, so my only aim is to perform to the best of my ability. It's nothing more than hard work." Chan Dui replied with a smile. She then turned around to face Chan Songfeng, who was sitting in an upright manner, and she chided in a cold voice, "If you really can't find anything, then why don't you flip the box on its head and start from the records on the bottom? Didn't you hear Steward Shue's words just then? For the past 1,000 years, the records in this small town have only recorded information about the other branch of the Chan clan. If I remember correctly, this branch shares the same ancestor with your Dragontail County's Chan clan. What, is it fun to flip through these genealogy records where everyone is either a servant or a maid?" Beads of sweat formed on Chan Songfeng's forehead. His lips were slightly pale, and he surprisingly didn't dare to talk back to Chan Dui. He hurriedly stood up and bent down to flip the wooden box over. The old steward immediately sat up straight, no longer appearing relaxed and carefree like before. Lu Baqiao truly couldn't watch on anymore. Chan Songfeng was indeed a meek person, but he was still the future clan leader of Dragontail County's Chan clan. Regardless of Chan Dui's background, and regardless of whether they were from the same clan or same sect, she still at least needed to show him some basic respect. Thus Lu Baqiao's voice was solemn as he said, "Chen Dui, if I'm not blind, Chen Songfeng is helping you right now. So even if you're not grateful, you shouldn't speak to him in such a demeaning manner." Chen Songfeng hurriedly looked up and gestured to Lu Baqiao with his eyes. However, Lu Baqiao shot a glare right back at him and exclaimed, "Even emperors will have a few poor relatives. What, there might be some exceptions. Fine. But do these exceptions give them the right to act contemptuously toward others?" He was frank and forthright. This was the inherent nature of Wind Lightning Field's Lu Baqiao. Chen Songfeng wore a bitter expression. The old steward lowered his head to drink tea, pretending that he could neither see nor hear this exchange. Chen Dui faltered for a moment before smiling faintly and saying, "That's true." This time it was Lu Baqiao who felt a little stumped. Chen Dui placed the record she was reading on the table, and she planned to go out for some fresh air. As the host, Steward Xue naturally invited her to stay. However, Chen Dui politely turned down his invitation. After leaving the side office, Chen Dui stood in the corridor and looked into the distance. There was a fairly large space in front of the office lobby, and in this space there stood an archway facing the lobby door. There was a large character inscribed in an ancient script, and this was the character U, as in mountain range. This wasn't a rare sight. Each mortal empire and nation would designate 5 mountains as the 5 mountains, with 1 mountain in each of the north, south, east, west, and center. The gateways standing before these mountains would all be inscribed with 2 characters personally written by the emperor, with the character U always written in a traditional script. Scholars, cultivators, and immortals of the future generations had hundreds upon thousands of different explanations for why this was. As for the true reason, however, it had most likely already been lost in the annals of history. Chen Dui saw a large figure and a small figure sitting on the white stone steps under the archway, quietly chit-chatting about something. She hesitated for a moment before slowly walking over. In order to remove any suspicion of her eavesdropping, she purposely coughed when she approached the 2 people sitting on the steps. Unexpectedly, however, one person was enthusiastic as they spoke, and one person was engrossed as they listened, resulting in both of them treating Chen Dui as if she didn't exist. Chen Dui didn't take this to heart, and she casually sat down on the other end of the step. Even though she appeared relaxed and casual, the manner in which she sat still exuded a sense of decorum and uprightness. The 2 people were conversing using the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and this was something that Chen Dui could understand. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come to this small town in the first place. However, she was still unable to speak this dialect smoothly, so she had remained largely silent when traveling here with Chen Songfeng. Of course, the main reason she didn't speak much was because she didn't have much to talk about with Chen Songfeng and Lu Baqiao. Lu Baqiao appeared frivolous on the surface, but he was in reality someone who was completely focused on the sword Dao. Although he seemed quite interesting, he was actually quite dull. Meanwhile, Chen Songfeng wanted to revive his declining clan. He appeared modest on the surface, but he was in reality someone who considered many things in his mind. These 2 top-notch young men from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent didn't mesh well with her. Their beliefs and aspirations were different, so they naturally wouldn't get along together. The young boy glanced at the woman who was approximately 10 years older than him, and his first impression of her was only a so-so. Chen Dui quietly sat on the step, and she didn't show any signs of wanting to speak or interrupt them. However, when glancing at them just then, Chen Dui had noticed that the little girl was holding a crystalline and emerald green gourd. Being as experienced as she was, she immediately knew that this was an extraordinary item. The young boy in noble clothing was none other than Clay Vase Ali's Song Jisen, while the little girl who looked like a porcelain doll was none other than Sun-Scorched Mountain's Tao Zi. Song Jisen had visited the Li clan's residence with Song Chongjing before, and he had immediately taken a liking to this little girl. This was because he had always liked exquisite and beautiful things ever since a young age. Meanwhile, he had a dislike for crude and ordinary things. Tao Zi also had a very good impression of Song Jisen, so the 2 of them mysteriously became good friends. Most importantly, the age gap between them allowed them to freely and happily converse with each other. In fact, Song Jisen didn't feel like he was acting in a perfunctory manner at all, so much so that he asked his uncle Song Chongjing to force the Li clan to let Tao Zi out, such that he could bring her over to the kiln supervision office to play. He had completely ignored those pitiful and aggrieved expressions as he had held Tao Zi's hand and led her out of the Li clan's residence. At the same time, he had also sent someone to deliver a message to Zhuhou, asking her to find the emerald green gourd in his box of treasures. This was his present to Tao Zi. The little girl was extremely friendly with Song Jisun, and she asked, "Firewood collecting brother, you mentioned the academy archways just then, one of the 12 types of archways. Before coming here, I heard Grandpa say that the Great Li Empire's Mountain Cliff Academy is doing quite poorly right now when he was talking to someone. Do you know what's written on the Mountain Cliff Academy's archway?" Because of the characters Jisun in Song Jisun's name, Tao Zi had given him the nickname Firewood Collecting Brother. Song Jisun didn't mind this, and he completely ignored the outsider woman at this moment as he turned to Tao Zi and replied with a smile, "I have no idea. I've never left the small town in my life, and I haven't read too many books either. After talking with you for so long, I feel like I've almost exhausted all of my knowledge." Tao Zi sighed and said, "I wonder if Grandpa Yuan is having any luck with his search." Song Jisun smiled, and he looked down as he patted the bottom hem of his brocade robe. There was a complicated look in his eyes. Sitting a fair distance away from them, Chandu suddenly asked, "Little girl, does your gourd occasionally emit a sound by itself?" Tao Zi turned around and raised the gourd up high with 2 hands, bragging with a wide smile. "Firewood collecting brother gave this to me." She completely ignored Chandui's question. However, Chandu simply dismissed this with a smile. "It makes a buzzing sound every time there's a lightning storm," Song Jisun casually replied. Chandu nodded and said, "As expected, it's a sword-nurturing gourd." Song Jisun was slightly puzzled. Tao Zi hurriedly chimed in, saying, I know. My family has 3 sword-nurturing gourds. My grandpa has a gray one and it's super ugly. The one that Grandpa Lu owns is the cutest. It's small and palm-sized, and with a whoosh it will release dozens of mini flying swords. Big Sister Sue's one isn't big or small, and it's golden purple in color. However, it's a shame that Big Sister Sue doesn't like to take it out too much. I had to beg her a lot of times before I was finally able to touch it. However, Big Sister Sue quickly put it away again. "Little girl, you shouldn't blame your Big Sister Sue," Chen Dui explained. Golden purple sword nurturing gourds are extremely rare, and they can rank as one of the top 3 types of sword nurturing gourds. I estimate that the one she owns is the only one in the entire Eastern Treasured Vial continent. Moreover, even though golden purple sword nurturing gourds are extremely brilliant when it comes to nurturing swords, they do have a drawback in that they're very fragile. It's very easy to damage them with sharp objects. Tao Zi hugged her emerald green gourd and asked, "Then what about my one?" "It's also very valuable," Chen Dui replied with a smile. The little girl tugged Song Jisun's sleeve and asked in a timid voice, "Firewood collecting brother, do you want to take it back?" Song Jisun patted her head, a doting expression on his face as he chuckled and said, "To say nothing of this one gourd, I'd be willing to give you another one as well if I had it." Chan Dui suddenly recalled something interesting and she said, "The treasure pagoda held an auction in the past, and the most valuable item being auctioned was none other than a gourd vine that had never been seen before. There were 6 small gourds growing on the vine, and it was said that this vine was personally planted in our world by the Tao ancestor before he became an immortal. It took several thousand years for the vine to produce this string of 6 gourds, and each gourd was a different size and color. It was extremely mysterious. There is no lack of extraordinary things in the myriad worlds." Song Jisun remarked, sincerely dying in a desolate area outside the small town. A flying sword was hovering in midair like an obedient child standing before their elder. It was as if it were standing there with its head lowered and its hands clasped behind its back. There was a slightly disheveled middle-aged scholar standing in front of the sword, and both of his sideburns had already become as white as frost. If Zhao Yao or Song Jisun were present, they would discover that their master's hair had grayed significantly in just a mere 10 days. The flying sword was pointing at the silent Bai Yuan, the mountain-moving ape from Sun-Scorched Mountain. He was radiating with an irascible aura at this moment, and it was as if he were about to leap into a life-and-death battle at any moment. He couldn't suppress his displeasure anymore, and he asked in a solemn voice, "Why did you allow the deity from True Martial Mountain to go just then?" Yet, you stopped me from going? Mr. Qi, are you being too biased? Asking such a question to Qi Jingquan's face was naturally very disrespectful. However, Bai Yuan didn't feel like he was doing anything wrong at all. Even though True Martial Mountain was a sacred land for martial artists in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, the disciples there all acted independently, so their sense of companionship wasn't especially strong. When it came to the powerful cultivators and martial artists, it more so seemed like they were disciples in name only. The rules of True Martial Mountain were also renowned for being broad but hollow, so there wasn't any real sense of constraint either. That being the case, what kind of cohesive power would True Martial Mountain have? Qi Jingquan's face was filled with exhaustion, and he turned to the flying sword and said, "You can return now, your master is safe." The flying sword happily bounced in the air, feeling as if it had been granted freedom. It then turned around and soared into the distance. Bai Yuan felt like he understood the situation, and this caused him to become even more enraged. "Sure enough, that young girl is your disciple, Qi Jingquan. If you're coveting the Lu clan sword scripture, you can be frank and admit it to me. As long as it doesn't end up in Wind Lightning Field's hands, I don't care if your secret disciple takes it or not. However, you insist on being so secretive. What, you want to reap all the benefits for yourself, yet you want to maintain your reputation as a noble scholar at the same time. You reap the benefits, yet I have to sacrifice my reputation." If Bai Yuan's disrespectful question had been as a result of his anger just then, his words of humiliation right now were undoubtedly a sign that he was no longer going to play nice with Qi Jingquan. Qi Jingquan's expression remained unchanging, and he said slowly, "As the sage who's responsible for overlooking this realm for 60 years, there are some things that I do need to explain to you. Firstly, I have no relationship with that young girl, and I simply appreciate her talent." The plaque that reads Unmatched Aura contains a portion of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Sword Dao Aura, and when Ning Yao stood under the plaque, the characters inscribed on it automatically resonated with her. However, it was a shame that her sword wasn't of sufficient quality to house the aura possessed by those characters. Thus, I gave her a helping hand and placed 2 of the characters in her sword. That's my only relationship with her. Your assumption that she's a secret disciple of mine isn't correct. Qi Jingquan smiled in a self-deprecating manner and continued, "As the sage overlooking this place, if I were truly shameless enough to steal from what's been entrusted to me, do you really think anyone would be able to find out? What you're worried about is nothing more than a mere sword scripture that can kill someone in their dreams. Do I, Qi Jingquan, need to scheme for 60 years to obtain it?" Bai Yuan was a high-ranking member of Sun-Scorched Mountain, and he had seen far too many long-term conspiracies and plots. He had more so experienced the power and might of many sanctimonious immortals. As such, how could he be willing to easily believe Qi Jingquan's words? However, his tone became far calmer than before, and he sneered, "Oh? So you're saying that I'm projecting?" Qi Jingquan glanced at Bai Yuan and said, "My reason for allowing the person from True Martial Mountain to pass while obstructing you a little was actually very simple. Many people joke that there are 2 types of true people in True Martial Mountain: true noble people and true despicable people. Regarding the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, I can trust every single word that he says. However, you're different. You severely wounded Lu Xianying, destroying his path to attain the Great Tao. Yet, at the same time, you purposely left him alive to avoid being kicked out of this realm by me. A person like you." Qi Jingquan chuckled when he said this, and he corrected himself by remarking, "Oh, I almost forgot. You're not a person." Bai Yuan squinted his eyes, and he clenched his fists so tight that the cracking of his joints could be heard. If it were a mortal enemy from Wind Lightning Field or some other enemy of Sun-Scorched Mountain taunting him and saying that he wasn't a person, Bai Yuan wouldn't take this to heart at all. However, Qi Jingquan had uttered these words in a calm and gentle manner, and this caused Bai Yuan to mysteriously feel a great sense of humiliation. Qi Jingquan paid no attention to Bai Yuan's unbridled fury, and he continued, "Obstructing you was for the good of Sun-Scorched Mountain." Ning Yao was about to summon her bonded weapon. As someone from Sun-Scorched Mountain who's interacted with Sword Qi and Sword Intent for 1,000 years, are you telling me that you were unable to sense that pressure? That little girl was merely putting in a last-ditch struggle. Mr. Qi, are you really trying to frighten me using that measly mystical ability? Bai Yuan roared with laughter, and he feigned sudden realization as he said, "I've heard others say that your master lost his integrity in his final years, and this resulted in him dropping in status time and time again. In the end, not only was his statue removed from the temple, but it was even smashed into pieces by the others. I didn't believe this at the time, thinking that the mighty fourth sage of Confucianism was someone who could say a few words even if he came across the legendary Tao ancestor or Buddha. As things stand right now, it seems like the Confucian branch of your master to you is going to die out in just 2 generations. The teachings of virtuous men will last but 5 generations. Who said this? Yet, why is your branch so exceptionally pathetic? Perhaps the rumors about your master in some of the academies were true? Perhaps he wasn't a mighty sage of Confucianism, but instead a 1 in 1,000-year fraud." Qi Jingchun frowned slightly, but he didn't interrupt Bai Yuan's rambling. He quietly listened to everything the mountain-moving ape had to say. Bai Yuan roared with wanton laughter, and he took a step forward before pointing at the scholar who was receiving a brutal scolding. With a wicked smile on his face, he sneered, "Qi Jingchun, isn't the Confucian sect most loyal to abiding by the rules and etiquette? I'm acting within the rules right now, so what can you do about me?" Qi Jingchun sighed softly as he turned around to look at the small town. He then turned back to Bai Yuan and asked, "Have you finished speaking?" Bai Yuan faltered upon hearing this. He looked Qi Jingchun up and down before putting down his finger and huffing. How boring. Even clay statues of bodhisattvas have a temper. Yet who knew that scholars are even more calm and composed? You scholars don't talk back when you're cursed, so I wonder if you also won't strike back when you're attacked. Qi Jingchun smiled and said, "You can give it a try." Bai Yuan was seemingly tempted to take up this offer, but in the end, he ultimately didn't lash out. "Qi Jingchun, do you insist on blocking me?" Bai Yuan asked. "If I don't, the consequences will be so great that even sun-scorched mountain can't shoulder it," Qi Jingchun replied. "Truly?" Bai Yuan asked in a solemn voice. Qi Jingchun didn't play any mind games, nor did he step aside to allow Bai Yuan to pass. Instead, he patiently nodded and replied, "Truly." Bai Yuan stroked his chin in thought. In the end, he glanced at someplace far behind Qi Jingchun and humphed, "Those 2 kids can count themselves lucky. Pass them this message. Don't let me see you in the future. Or else." Bai Yuan turned around and strode away. With his back to Qi Jingchun, the old ape suddenly lifted a hand and stuck up his thumb. However, he slowly rotated his hand until his thumb faced downward. Qi Jingchun looked up at the hazy and overcast sky. Rain was about to fall. A voice suddenly traveled over from the small town and sounded in his ears, and this was a request from the martial artist from True Martial Mountain. He wished for Qi Jingchun to give him some leniency and allow him to summon an honored deity from True Martial Mountain. Qi Jingchun nodded and said, "Permission granted." Right after Qi Jingchun said this, if someone coincidentally looked up at this moment, they would see a speck of light suddenly appear in the sky before instantly shooting down into the small town and leaving a thin trail of golden light behind it. "Mr. Qi," a young boy called out behind Qi Jingchun. Qi Jingchun turned around, and he saw a young boy and a young girl running toward him. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion upon seeing Ning Yao, the girl in green from the outside world. Zhao Yao had fallen in love with her at first sight, and Mr. Qi had given him a warning at that time, saying that Ning Yao was like a scabbardless sword that could easily hurt others. However, Zhao Yao didn't have any understanding of emotions, so he was unable to understand the deeper meaning behind these words. As a result, he was unable to rid himself of his feelings toward Ning Yao. Even so, Qi Jingchun still felt like it would be unsuitable for him to speak too frankly and say that the young girl had a mind that aspired to Tao. This was a most unemotional mind. Calling her unemotional was definitely not derogatory in any way, and instead, this was a complimentary remark of high praise. Of the many types of love expressed in the world, the love between a man and a woman was only one of them. In the mortal world, the love between a man and a woman could perhaps move one to tears. Perhaps such a feeling of love could also spur a man or woman to sacrifice themselves for their lover. For cultivators, however, things would be far more complicated. Qi Jingchun's smile became a lot more natural when he saw the young boy in straw sandals. His voice was gentle as he teased, "You fought several battles, and each one was more earth-shattering than the last. Chen Ping'an was slightly embarrassed. "There are two things that I need to tell you," Qi Jingchen said frankly. "The first thing is that the mountain-moving ape from Sun-Scorched Mountain has retreated. He's going to leave the small town very soon." Chen Ping'an didn't hesitate at all, and he directly asked, "The old ape's going to leave from the east gate?" Qi Jingchen raised a hand and gestured for Chen Ping'an to calm down, saying with a smile, "Let me finish first." Lu Xianying managed to pull through. Chen Ping'an immediately became tense, and he carefully asked, "Mr. Qi, are you saying that Lu Xianying won't die?" Qi Jingchen nodded and replied, "Someone offered their help, so Lu Xianying isn't in danger of dying anymore. This is certain. However, the bad news is that he's severely wounded, so he might not be able to move freely in the future." A grin spread across Chen Ping'an's face. Like a bow left at full draw, Chen Ping'an had been feeling extremely tense these past few days. He hadn't been able to relax for even a second. After hearing that Lu Xianying would live, however, he immediately relaxed and fell backward, falling unconscious. Ning Yao hurriedly caught his falling body. Kai Jinjian forcefully opened Chen Ping'an's acupoints and also smashed the doorway to his mind. As a result, his energy and vitality have been leaking this entire time. Yet, Lu Xianying was coincidentally hurt at this time as well, and this pushed him to draw on his potential with no regard for anything else. Since Chen Ping'an was already in a dire state, he decided that it wouldn't make much difference if his situation worsened even more. Initially, he could have lived for half a year more. Now, however, he can most likely only live for 10 days at most, Qi Jingchen explained. This implied that Chen Ping'an had been sacrificing his lifespan when he had run across the rooftops, waded through the creek, and escaped through the mountains. Not only that, but Chen Ping'an had been completely aware of this as well. "Mr. Qi, just tell me how to save Chen Ping'an," Ning Yao said. Qi Jingchen sighed in his mind. This was the mysterious nature of one's Dao heart. Ning Yao didn't feel no emotion toward Chen Ping'an, or else she wouldn't have accompanied him all this time. When ordinary people heard this terrifying news, they would definitely feel a sense of panic, grief, and sympathy. The only difference would be the severity of these feelings and the length of time that they experienced them. However, Ning Yao was different. She didn't experience any of these feelings. Instead, she jumped directly to the outcome that she desired the most. How could she save Chen Ping'an? In the world of cultivation, cultivating one's strength was something tangible and easily seen. As long as one cultivated in earnest and continued to advance, the only difference between them and others would be the size of their footsteps. However, cultivating the mind was far more mystical and intangible. Paths and opportunities existed around every corner, and it was as if each of these different methods could allow one to achieve ultimate success. At the same time, however, it seemed like each and every one of these different methods was a heretical method that no one could offer guidance on. When it came to cultivating the mind, those with a Dao heart, a mind that aspired to Tao, would be able to progress in leaps and bounds. They would be able to reach the heavens in a single step. This was also why Ning Yao was able to confidently look at Chen Ping'an with pure eyes and boldly ask him whether he liked her or not. Qi Jingchuan's expression became increasingly solemn as he recalled the young Taoist priest with the lotus hat. Ning Yao squatted down and gently placed Chen Ping'an on her back. At the same time, she asked, "Mr. Qi, are you going to answer my question? However, let me say this first. I feel like the old shopkeeper in the Yang family's medicine shop is quite mediocre when it comes to treating others. However, Chen Ping'an knows an elder from the shop who's quite capable and impressive." Looking at Ning Yao's serious expression, Qi Jingchen asked a strange question. What matter in the world is the most challenging and heaven-defying? A single person with a single sword killing all demons. Ning Yao loudly proclaimed without any hesitation. Qi Jingchen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "It's cultivation," he corrected with slight exasperation. Ning Yao carefully mulled over this for a moment before saying, "It's actually the same." Qi Jingchen pointed at where she and Chen Ping'an had been standing just then before pointing at another location. The sword furnace can nurture one's body, while eternity can strengthen one's spirit. To Chen Ping'an, however, these things can at most only maintain an equilibrium. If he's lucky, there might be some slight surplus. When he wakes up, help me pass on this message. When you practice the fist technique in the future, you definitely have to give your full effort. if for nothing else but to stay alive. Ningyao breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, she wasn't feeling much better than Chen Ping'an at this moment, and it was only because her physique and cultivation base were far superior that she was able to maintain her consciousness. Mr. Qi, so should I bring Chen Ping'an to Clay Vase Alley to recuperate now? Or should I bring him to visit Lu Xianying first? Either option is fine, Qi Jingchun replied with a smile. Ningyao thought about this for a moment before saying, Chen Ping'an will definitely want to see Lu Xianying when he opens his eyes, so I'll go to Master Ruan's place first. Qi Jingchun nodded and said, I'll accompany you too for a little while. He and Ningyao walked side by side. A gentle spring breeze brushed over them, with the scholar walking with his hands clasped behind his back, and the young girl walking with a young boy resting on her back. After walking for a while, Ningyao suddenly asked, Mr. Qi, as the current owner of this realm, have you seized the opportunity to take a few talented disciples? Qi Jingchun smiled and shook his head, replying, No, I only took a scholarly attendant who can't really be regarded as a disciple. I decided against taking disciples in order to avoid suspicion before, but looking back at it now, I did indeed let many good talents slip out of my hands. Mr. Qi, are you all-knowing in this place? Ningyao asked. If I want to know something, then I'll be able to know it, Qi Jingchun replied with a smile. However, what I know won't necessarily be the truth. After all, an iota of difference for some things can lead to a misunderstanding of severe proportions. There was something else that Qi Jingchun didn't say. That was, after leaving the small town, he had already lost his mystical ability to reflect all matter of heaven and earth in his heart. This was because someone had taken away that regal tablet, something that one of the second sages of Confucianism had left in the small town. The regal tablet had also been one of the main components of the spell formation in the small town. Ningyao hesitated for a moment, but she ultimately couldn't suppress her curiosity, and she asked, Mr. Qi, what's your current cultivation base? Have you reached the upper 5 tiers yet? Also, are you genuinely in this realm? Of course, you don't have to answer my questions if you don't want to. I'm just asking out of curiosity. Sure enough, Qi Jingchun didn't answer her questions. Ningyao rolled her eyes and didn't ask anything else. Qi Jingchun slowed down, whether unconsciously or not, and he turned around to look beside him. The young boy blinked his eyes. The middle-aged man also blinked his eyes. Qi Jingchun gave a knowing smile, and he imperceptibly picked up his pace again. A noble man would always seek to help others. After accompanying them for a long time, Qi Jingchun stopped and said with a smile, I'll see you off here. The middle-aged scholar stood there, silent as he watched the gradually disappearing Ningyao and Chen Ping'an. He took a step forward, and he instantly arrived next to the dragon-slaying platform. Confucian sages all had a kindred character that was extremely powerful. No matter who it was, as long as they wrote, used, or spoke this character, they would increase the cultivation of the relevant sage by a small sliver. However, just like how dripping water could penetrate stone, this would all add up. Qi Jingchun was an exception. He had not one kindred character, but 2. Moreover, the significance of these characters was extremely great, and the level of them was also extremely profound. Tranquil mind begets enlightenment. Spring, the world welcomes spring. It was exactly because of this that he had been banished to this small world that was completely detached from the outside world. Even though Qi Jingchun was only one of the mountain masters of the 3 schools and 72 academies, he was indeed someone who couldn't be viewed through normal lenses. The seemingly useless scholar who had refused to offer any reaction in the face of Bai Yuan's continual provocation and humiliation shut his eyes and quietly contemplated the third stroke of the character Tranquil in his mind. He then extended 2 fingers and made a gentle downward slicing motion in the air. The near-indestructible dragon-slaying platform was instantly cut into 2. With a flick of his sleeve, one half of the neatly cut dragon-slaying platform landed in Ruanqiong's blacksmith shop, while the other half appeared in a small residence in Clay Vase Alley. After doing this, Qi Jingchun fell into deep thought, just like a Go player would when contemplating their next move. It started to rain, and the light drizzle eventually transformed into a huge downpour that was accompanied by flashing lightning and booming thunder. However, Qi Jingchun remained standing there, lost in thought. As someone who was viewed as a teacher by the residents of the small town, Qi Jingchun was thinking about his own teacher at this moment and the Ma family's residence in Apricot Blossom Alley. The deity in golden armor returned to the courtyard after searching through the entire town. Strangely, however, no one had noticed it as it had walked through the streets and alleys. Ma Kuxuan was squatting outside the door, and after seeing the deity return, a hopeful expression spread across his face. "How is it?" the militarian cultivator from True Martial Mountain asked. The deity looked extremely dignified and mighty in its suit of armor, and Ma Kuxuan was unable to hear what it was saying even though he could only see it move its mouth. He frantically looked at the swordsman, who sighed and informed him. "He said that your grandma committed too many sins when she was alive, and this resulted in her soul and spirit becoming as fragile as her body. Thus, your grandma's soul decayed when she died. This small town is also different from the outside world, and it possesses an innate resistance against ghosts and other beings of the Yin element. Because of all these reasons, he was unable to find your grandma's remnant soul." Ma Kuxuan's face contorted in fury, and he looked up at the deity and roared, "I don't give a crap what method you use. Hurry up and find my grandma's soul for me." The martial artist's expression changed drastically. He was afraid that Ma Kuxuan would offend the true god who had the surname Yin, and he was just about to speak out to stop the young boy. For some unknown reason, however, the deity in golden armor surprisingly opened its mouth and spoke using the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, saying, "It's not that I don't want to, it's simply that I'm unable to." After saying this, the magnificent deity who was shrouded in a golden glow turned to look at the swordsman from True Martial Mountain. The swordsman took a deep breath before feigning an act of offering incense and bowing 3 times to the deity. Each time he bowed, a wisp of faint golden aura that was as thick as a thread would hover out from his mud pellet acupoint and be breathed in by the deity in golden armor. After completing this ritual, the deity leaped up and transformed into a dazzling column of light that shot into the distance. The swordsman's face was deathly pale, and he immediately pulled over a chair and sat down, slowly exhaling a breath. This was the real reason behind the common saying, "Inviting a god is easy, but farewelling a god is hard." Ma Kuxuan wore a cold expression as he retracted his gaze. He turned around and walked inside the house, sitting down next to the ice-cold corpse of his grandma. He reached over and grabbed her dry and shriveled hand, and he stared intently at her face, remaining silent for a long time. The swordsman removed the tiger talisman from his waist, and it was clear that its luster had become slightly dimmer compared to before. He slowly placed the talisman in his sleeve. After resting for a brief moment, the man stood back up. However, he didn't walk to Ma Kuxuan, and he instead walked over to sit on the doorstep. With his back facing the young boy, he slowly explained, "Your grandma was most likely standing at the door when she was slapped by someone. The force of the slap was immense, and this caused her to fly into the house and crash to the ground, resulting in her death. You might not want to hear what I'm about to say, but you at least deserve to know the truth. The assailant was most likely a cultivator, and they definitely didn't control their power properly. Moreover, your grandma was already feeble to begin with, so the combination of these factors caused her to pass away. Since the assailant was a cultivator, the prime suspect is Chun Ping'an and that young girl from outside, or the young girl whose cultivation you disturbed on the covered bridge. Perhaps she attacked your grandma as an act of revenge. The probability of the assailant being Chun Ping'an and that young girl from outside is extremely small, while the probability of it being the young girl from the covered bridge is extremely big. You decided to go to the unmarked burial ground to kill Chun Ping'an, and you did this with the intention of being dutiful toward your grandma. You wanted to sever her negative karma with Chun Ping'an. However, you definitely couldn't have imagined that your trip to the burial ground would coincide with someone charging to your house to seek revenge." Ma Kuxuan shakily reached over, and he gently stroked his grandma's cheek with the back of his hand. Her cheek was severely swollen, and it had already become black and blue in color. "So I was the one who caused my grandma to die. Is that what you're saying?" Ma Kuxuan asked softly. The swordsman replied, "According to the views of society, yes and no." "According to the views of..." Ma Kuxuan immediately cut him off, unwilling to listen to his reasonings any longer. He stood up with a baleful expression and he spat, "I'm not allowed to destroy nations and massacre cities, and I'm not allowed to wantonly kill innocent people either. I'm not allowed to do this and I'm not allowed to do that. So tell me, am I allowed to seek revenge and kill my enemy? Before the man could even reply, Ma Kuxuan continued, if I'm not allowed to do even this, then what's the fucking point of becoming a militarian cultivator? Why don't I act as I please and become a wanton demon instead? Why didn't I accept that Taoist nun's offer at that time and join her whatever sect? The man hesitated for a moment before replying, you can go as long as you're able to endure the consequences. Just like today. Also, there are some things that I perhaps didn't explain clearly before. For example, killing people. In fact, there's a different limit for different people, with the number of people you're able to kill definitely different from the number of people I'm able to kill. This is not only because I'm stronger than you and possess a higher cultivation base. One's temperament and mindset are also extremely important. Perhaps I'll kill 100 people, and all of them will be detestable people who deserve death. Meanwhile, you might only kill 2 or 3 people, but there's already someone among them who's innocent and doesn't deserve death. Ma Kuxuan suddenly chuckled and sneered. Why would I ever ask you about whether I can kill someone or how I should kill someone? Do you think I'll ever need your help? I almost forgot. I'm still not an official disciple of true martial mountain yet. He glanced down at his grandma before turning around to face the square table in the main hall. Hurry up and lead the way, he bellowed in fury. A black cat immediately shot out from under the table, and Ma Kuxuan sprinted after it and left the house. The man didn't pay any heed to this. One had to realize that the nation he originally came from had descended into chaos 150 years ago. Mountains had crumbled and rivers had been severed, and the 100 years of chaotic battle had resulted in tragedies and miseries that were unsurpassed in the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent. When a new dynasty finally brought an end to the chaos, only fewer than 800,000 of the initial 10 million households remained. This caused many young children to develop the misconception that the corpses of dead people didn't need to be collected and buried. The swordsman was one of these children. He slowly stood up. Compared to telling Ma Kuxuan that the assailant had already been kicked out of the small town, he was more interested in visiting Master Ruan and asking him a question. He wanted to ask why the circulation of karmic fate was so obvious in this place, even though Buddhism had already been in a relatively weak state in Eastern Treasured Vile continent for 1,000 years. Not only that, but the Buddhists were also the weakest force in this small town. The militarian swordsman followed Ma Kuxuan from a great distance. Even if Ma Kuxuan were an official disciple of true martial mountain at this moment, the swordsman still wouldn't interfere too much with his personal affairs and grudges. On the battlefield, people could stick by each other through thick and thin. When it came to cultivation, however, each person would have to take responsibility for their own life and death. Of course, nothing was absolute. For example, the swordsman had stepped forward to save Ma Kuxuan when he had almost been killed by Chan Ping'an. There had been 2 reasons for this. Firstly, the swordsman hoped that a prodigy like Ma Kuxuan wouldn't die too early. He wanted Ma Kuxuan to temper both his talent and temperament in true martial mountain, such that he could reach a greater height. At the same time, he also wanted Ma Kuxuan to become one of the representatives of militarianism, such that he could display his power and brilliance in the coming age of turbulence. Secondly, Mr. Qi had personally said that Ma Kuxuan and Chan Ping'an should only go as far as to determine a victor between them. They shouldn't go as far as to kill each other. At that time, the swordsman had thought that Mr. Qi was worried about Chan Ping'an being killed. Only afterward did he realize that this wasn't the case at all. Keeping a large distance between himself and Ma Kuxuan, the swordsman noticed that the young boy's pace was gradually slowing down and becoming more relaxed after his initial burst of hot-headedness. In the end, he looked like an ordinary young boy strolling through the streets. However, this changed when the black cat jumped down from some rooftop and onto his shoulder, before turning around and sprinting away. It was as if the black cat were telling Ma Kuxuan that he had already found the target. Ma Kuxuan started to jog slowly, and his aura changed once again. The spring rain was light, and it simply hastened the footsteps of those on the streets. However, it was still far from compelling them to hide under the eaves. A young man and a young woman in extravagant clothes were currently walking toward the main street from Dragon Riding Alley. Their faces were filled with joy, and it was as if they had both obtained some fated opportunity. However, a youth was soon about to teach them the meaning of disaster and fortune always coming hand in hand. Ma Kuxuan broke into a sprint 50 paces away from the two people, and when he was 20 paces away, he suddenly called out to catch their attention. When the man turned around, Ma Kuxuan ruthlessly threw a punch, not holding back in the least. This was a punch aimed at his head. The young man was sent flying backward onto the street, and he slammed into the ground with a heavy thud. His body convulsed slightly, and he showed no signs of getting back up. Ma Kuxuan landed on both feet after throwing this punch, and he was coincidentally standing right next to the young woman. With a twist of his body, he immediately threw a swinging arm at the woman's neck with his left arm. With a bam, the young cultivator, who was half a head taller than him, was sent crashing into the ground. The woman's head smashed into the muddy ground. Ma Kuxuan raised a foot and stomped on the woman's forehead. He bent over and looked down, gazing at her dazed face as he said, using the official dialect, "I know the assailant isn't the small town anymore. However, this doesn't matter. I can investigate things myself." The beautiful young woman's eyes were bloodshot, and trails of blood were also seeping out from her nose and ears. There was shock and terror on her face as she looked up at the severely tanned young boy. Ma Kuxuan's face was filled with wickedness as he continued, "I, Ma Kuxuan, ruined your mental state during your cultivation, so you naturally have the right to seek revenge in the future. Even if you hack me to death, I'll accept my fate and I won't blame you at all. In fact, even if you fail to kill me, I might still forgive you if I'm in a good mood, and I'll be willing to play around with you a few more times. In my eyes, this is how carefree the world should be." The young woman was presumably a prodigy in her sect, so when had she ever encountered a situation like this before? She sobbed in fright, and it was very likely that she wouldn't even be able to remember Ma Kuxuan's words. She simply begged, "Let me go. Please, I beg you, let me go. Your grandma wasn't killed by me, and I wasn't aware of this matter at all." Ma Kuxuan put more weight on his foot, causing the young woman's head to slowly sink into the muddy ground. "Do you know what I detest most about you people? It's that you people can still remain so dismissive after committing a sin. You people don't feel a shred of guilt or remorse at all, not a single shred." There was a sobbing tone in his voice, and there was more so an intense look of hatred in his eyes. The young woman reached over with great difficulty, grabbing Ma Kuxuan's ankle as she begged, "Please let me go. My grandpa is the commander of Sea-Tide Cavalry, and I'm his most adored granddaughter. Can compensate you. I can give you whatever you want." There was a look of pity and imploration in her eyes. Ma Kuxuan wore a fake smile as he mused, "Oh, what a coincidence. I'm the grandson of Ma Donghua, my grandma." He suddenly raised his foot a little before placing it back down and rubbing it on the young woman's delicate and beautiful face. "Sea-Tide Cavalry, was it? Just you wait. I'll definitely play around with you in the future." Ma Kuxuan removed his foot and looked to his left and right. On the left was the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, and he was standing there with his sword strapped to his back. On his right was an elegant young man, and he held an oil paper umbrella in his hand as he stood beside the collapsed and pitiful man and looked at Ma Kuxuan. Ma Kuxuan's instinct told him that the young man with the umbrella was actually waiting for him to kill the young woman. Ma Kuxuan suddenly squatted down. The young woman attempted to escape, yet her neck was instantly held down by the soaked young boy. Only after she stopped moving did he let go of her. He lightly slapped her face again and again as he smiled and said, "Remember this, okay? My name is Ma Kuxuan, and I'll definitely look for you again in the future. And also that person who isn't in the small town anymore. You definitely have to thank him well. Otherwise, the relationship between us wouldn't have been so great." In the end, Ma Kuxuan spat on the young woman's face. He stood up and walked to the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, asking in a low voice, "Who's that person?" "The future mountain master of Lakeview Academy, one of the 72 academies of Confucianism," the swordsman replied calmly. "He's called Cui Minghuang, and his ancestry is especially prominent. He's also come here to retrieve a subjugation treasure, and he's an extremely shrewd and calculating person. You need to be wary of him in the future. If I'm not wrong, he's already got an eye on you." Ma Kuxuan frowned and observed, "The feeling that he gives off is very different from the feeling that Mr. Qi gives off." The swordsman couldn't help but chuckle. "How many scholars do you think can be like Mr. Qi and adhere to their true selves?" He hesitated for a moment before explaining. Everyone in the outside world is spreading the rumor that Mr. Chi's cultivation base has declined, and that his mental state has collapsed after his master's reputation was damaged. Thus, he agreed to be banished to this small world. Even though he had to endure the constant erosion from the might of heaven and earth, he can still act wantonly and as he pleases. In my view, however, this isn't necessarily the case. Ma Kuxuan wasn't interested in these matters, and he turned around to look at the elegant young man. Still holding the oil paper umbrella, he was squatting down next to the young girl, and he was most likely speaking gentle words to comfort her. Ma Kuxuan retracted his gaze and walked side by side with the swordsman. His footsteps were heavy as he returned to Apricot Blossom Alley. Your wounds are fairly significant, so be careful not to leave any hidden problems. Otherwise, your future cultivation will also be affected, the swordsman warned. As Ma Kuxuan wiped the rainwater from his face, he suddenly asked, "What's our small town like in the eyes of those outsiders?" "It's like the creek outside the small town that's filled with all kinds of small fish and large fish," the swordsman replied. "There's knee-deep water, yet there are also deep and bottomless pools. When coming here to train and search for treasures, have any of the outsiders drowned before?" Ma Kuxuan asked. The swordsman smiled and shook his head, replying, "In the past, almost never. Most of them would peacefully obtain treasures, leaving everyone satisfied and happy. However, this time is an exception." In the Yang family's medicine shop, a young girl with a gallant disposition walked briskly inside as she carried a young boy on her back. She looked at a middle-aged shop assistant and asked, "Is Mr. Yang here?" Sensing the young girl's extraordinary aura, the shop assistant didn't dare to offend her, and he said with a nod, "Yes, he just finished sorting some medicine in the backyard. You two are looking for him. We're acquainted with Old Man Yang, and we want to obtain some medicine from him," Ning Yao replied solemnly. The shop assistant hesitated for a moment before deciding to lead them to the building in the backyard. An old man was lightly tapping the table with his smoking pipe, and there also stood a disheveled man in a distant corner of the room. This disheveled man was none other than Zheng Dafeng, the gatekeeper for the eastern gate of the small town. Perhaps this was a case of everyone having their vanquisher, with Zheng Dafeng not even daring to breathe too heavily in the presence of Old Man Yang. He no longer appeared like a punchable scoundrel. Old Man Yang waved his smoking pipe, and Zheng Dafeng hurriedly walked out of the building, bringing the other shop assistants with him. Old Man Yang looked at the familiar figure on Ning Yao's back. Chen Ping'an's lips were white, and his entire body was trembling. His arms were tightly wrapped around Ning Yao's neck as if his life depended on it. Old Man Yao calmly stood up, with one hand behind his back and one hand holding his smoking pipe as he walked up to Ning Yao. He looked Chen Ping'an in the eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "How many times have I told you? The cheaper your life and the lesser your fortune, the more you have to cherish your life and cherish your fortune. So what do? Every time you encounter a minor setback, you push yourself until you're on the brink of death. Since you like doing this so much, why didn't you follow after your mother at that time? Wouldn't that save you the trouble?" Old Man Yao was correct. When he was alive, he always liked to say that a person's fate could be seen when they were only 3 years old, and you were one who wouldn't live for long. That being the case, teaching you the best skills and most profound arts would naturally be a waste. You'll still be 6 feet under very soon after all. Ning Yao was wide-eyed with shock. In her imagination, Old Man Yang should have been a kindly and benevolent old man who always wore an amiable smile. Who knew that he would be such a bitter and vitriolic old man? "It hurts a lot," the old man sneered. Chen Ping'an nodded softly. He was already unable to speak. When he had woken up on Ning Yao's back, he had already started to feel some pain, most likely because the effects of the medicine had already worn off. However, Chen Ping'an had felt like he could still endure it for a little while. When they reached the covered bridge, though, he knew that he wouldn't be able to endure his wounds for much longer. Thus, Ning Yao hadn't even had the time to retrieve her saber by the creek, and she had immediately carried him and rushed over to the Yang family's medicine shop. The old man chuckled and said, "It hurts, huh? Then obediently endure it." He then glanced at Ning Yao and snapped, "Let him sit on the bench by himself, being carried by a young girl. Don't you find this embarrassing?" the old man mumbled. Ningyao forcefully suppressed her anger as she carefully placed Chen Ping'an down on the long bench. However, Chen Ping'an immediately swayed and looked like collapsing when she let go of him. Ningyao was just about to reach over and help him. However, even though Chen Ping'an couldn't speak, he still gestured with his eyes that he didn't need her help. The old man took a puff from his smoking pipe before observing Chen Ping'an's body and aura. He clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "You genuinely live up to your name as an impoverished young boy. But yes, you did indeed manage to keep your conscience clear, huh?" The old man was completely indifferent to Chen Ping'an's bone-piercing pain, and he scolded, "What kind of fortunate fate does Lu Xianying have? And what kind of destitute fate do you have? After so many years, are you still not aware of this? Him dying once is almost enough misfortune for you to die 10 times over. Do you understand?" Ningyao was truly unable to endure the old man's cruel words, and she asked solemnly, "Mr. Yang, can you please give Chen Ping'an some painkillers first?" The hunched old man shot a sideways glance at Ningyao. "He's your man?" he asked calmly. Ningyao replied with an angry glare. The old man ignored her, and he turned around to look at Chen Ping'an. As if in his own world, he fell into deep thought. In the end, he pursed his lips and sighed. He used his old smoking pipe to tap Chen Ping'an once on the shoulders, and twice each on his arms and legs. Suddenly, Chen Ping'an shifted to a position where he lay on his side, with his elbow under his head as he rested on the bench. "Sleep," the old man commanded. Chen Ping'an instantly shut his eyes and fell asleep, with his snores as loud as rumbling thunder, under the archway in front of the kiln supervision office. Chen Dui talked about all kinds of strange and interesting things, and the little girl from Sun-Scorched Mountain listened to her stories with relish. Taozi clicked her tongue in wonder and praised, "Big sister, you know so much." Chen Dui smiled faintly and replied, "You'll also know a lot when you grow up." Song Jisun was half serious as he mused, "Chen Dui, you also seem like a fairly normal person when we interact normally like this." Chen Dui raised a brow and asked, "So you're saying that I should act submissively and grovel before the greatly empire's monarch, Song Changjing?" Song Jisun roared with laughter. He pointed at Chen Dui and said, "If Mr. Qi, the teacher in our small town's private school, heard this, he would definitely furrow his brows. Do you know, you're treating things as if they're either black or white. This is very unreasonable. It might sound reasonable at the start, but it's actually extremely fragile against scrutiny. What I'm trying to say is, you naturally don't need to act obsequiously before Song Changjing, nor should you do so. However, Song Changjing is still the most powerful person in the Greatly Empire. Not only that, but he's even a paramount martial arts grandmaster. As an outsider, you should conform to our local customs, and also show a little more respect to your hosts. Is this not right? Why do you insist on wearing a cold expression and acting like the owner of the place? So be it if you want to act like that. However, you still dared to talk back to Song Changjing after being beaten half dead by him. I truly don't know what to say to you anymore." In the end, Song Jisun pointed at himself and said with a self-deprecating chuckle, "Even someone who's as foul-mouthed and mean-hearted as me understands the need to take stock of the situation and act appropriately." Chen Dui hesitated for a moment before replying, "It was a case of like charges repelling each other. I'm also a martial artist, and to be completely honest with you, I've always looked down on fellow martial artists from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Of course, I was eventually proven incorrect." "Very incorrect." Song Jisun was slightly astonished and he said, "You're a fairly realistic person. If a martial artist doesn't acknowledge someone's strength, then what else can they acknowledge?" Chen Dui replied indifferently. Song Jisun suddenly posed an incisive question, asking, "It feels like you outsiders who have come to our small town to search for treasures and fated opportunities have a fairly different view than us regarding principles and reasoning. Is it because you're more powerful than us?" Chen Dui shook her head and replied with a smile, "There's no need for me to explain anything. Once you leave the small town in the future, you'll also become just like us very quickly. When you enter the path of cultivation someday, you'll naturally understand what I mean. Otherwise, you won't understand even if I talk until my mouth is parched." Song Jisun sighed with emotion. "Becoming just like you people? How uninteresting." Taozi suddenly interjected at this moment, suggesting, "Then come to Sun-Scorched Mountain to play. It's super interesting. Song Jisun patted her small head and casually replied, "Sure thing." Chan Dui turned around, instinctively feeling a little tense and anxious. Dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade belt, Song Chongjing was standing near the archway. He turned to Song Jisun and said, "Go back to Clay Vase Alley and pack your things. We're going to leave soon." Song Jisun smiled and replied, "Got it. It's almost time to uproot and leave home." Tao Zi was reluctant to say goodbye and she asked, "Uproot and leave home? Does that mean bringing a tree with you and leaving home?" Song Jisun roared with laughter and he stood up and said, "Let's go, I'll bring you home first. This is called being responsible from beginning to end." Song Jisun held the little girl's hand and walked with her toward the gate of the office. He turned around and asked, "There won't be assassins outside the gate on Fortune Street, right?" Song Chongjing chuckled and replied, "You'll need to ask your neighbor and friend." Song Jisun pursed his lips. He glanced up at the sky, and what entered his gaze was a layer of thick and dark clouds. It looked like it was about to rain. His mood immediately took a nosedive. After taking Tao Zi home, Song Jisun was surprised to discover Song Chongjing standing under the old locust tree. He briskly walked over and asked in curiosity, "You're in such a hurry to leave?" Song Chongjing nodded and replied, "I received some news just now. There's a matter that I need to personally attend to, so we're going to directly take a horse-drawn carriage to Clay Vase Alley. We'll leave after you finish packing your things." Song Jisun looked over, and sure enough, there were 3 horse-drawn carriages outside the gate of the kiln supervision office. This was very likely the first time that he would take a horse-drawn carriage. Song Jisun bent down and entered the carriage in the front. Song Chongjing followed after him, and he sat down cross-legged. Song Jisun looked around, only to find that the carriage was completely empty. There was only a straw futon for him to sit on. This was completely different from the extravagance that he had imagined, and it more so wasn't something that would make one exclaim in delight and astonishment. Song Jisun was slightly disappointed. Initially, he had been extremely eager to see Jigui's expression of astonishment when she entered the carriage. There was a crisp sound of clopping hooves as the horses trotted over the blue stone slabs on the street. The 3 carriages left Fortune Street one after another. Song Chongjing raised the curtain to look out at the small town. From today onward, the Great Li Empire was going to comprehensively lose its nominal control over this small world. Thinking back, however, it was thanks to the huge benefits provided by this small world that the Great Li Empire had been able to grow from a small empire in some corner of Eastern Treasured Vile continent into the largest mortal empire in the continent. Not one of the largest, but the largest. This was a small world with 1,000 kilometers of mountains and rivers. In the future, information about this small world could perhaps only be found in the secret imperial history books of the Great Li Empire. Song Chongjing pushed these thoughts out of his mind and casually asked, "You're not going to say goodbye to Chenpingen?" The roads became uneven after leaving Fortune Street, and Song Jisun's body started to lightly bounce up and down along with the movements of the carriage. He shook his head and replied, "It's hard to say if he can even live. If I'm greeted by a corpse after waiting for a long time, just how revolting will that be? Even his good friend has died, so at that time, won't it be left to me, his neighbor, to help him arrange a funeral?" Song Chongjing replied with a nod. The little girl from Sun-Scorched Mountain mentioned a person called Ma Kuxuan. Song Jisun continued, "He's from Apricot Blossom Alley, and he's around the same age as me. I heard that he sold Chenpingen and that young girl's hiding location to Sun-Scorched Mountain for the price of 1 pouch of offering coins. Do you know his background? I heard that he was a mentally challenged retard, and I never thought that he had concealed himself so well." Song Chongjing thought about this for a moment before explaining, "Some clues have already been discovered regarding the assassin who was hiding in the Song clan before, the one who attempted to assassinate the prince from Great Sui Nation in Dragon Riding Alley. Among these clues, there was something about the young boy Ma Kuxuan. In the past few years, the assassin who used to be a prisoner interacted with Ma Kuxuan in secret many times. It's possible that they were master and disciple. However, True Martial Mountain has suddenly stuck its nose into this matter, so we have no option but to put it aside for the moment. After all, there are many disciples of True Martial Mountain in the Great Li Empire's army. Moreover, some of them are fairly high-ranking officials as well. Song Jisun smiled and mused. Uncle, there are also times when you have to say have no option? Song Chongjing didn't pay any heed to this and he said, who told me to be in such an important and inflexible position? This dog's hit greatly monarch. When the carriages approached Clay Vase Alley, Song Jisun asked, is Chun Ping'an really just Chun Ping'an? Song Chongjing couldn't help but laugh. Before having you move to Clay Vase Alley, the Kiln Supervision Office already conducted a thorough check of his background, numerous generations of his ancestors, to be precise. His lineage is clear, and there's nothing remarkable or problematic about it at all. His lineage also has no relationship with the notions of wealth, nobility, power, and influence. What, did that Chen Dui frighten you just then? Rest assured, I've already got a fairly solid guess regarding her background. The Chun clan branch that she comes from has no relationship with the Chun clan branch that Chun Ping'an comes from. So you don't need to worry at all. Chun Ping'an is simply just Chun Ping'an. The only person who can somewhat be regarded as his distant relative is Chun Songfeng, as well as Dragontail County's Chun clan. However, just think about it. They haven't had any contact for several hundred years, so can they still be regarded as relatives? Not only that, but the Chun clan in the small town has already fallen to such a miserable state that only a single member isn't a servant or a maid. In times of prosperity, friends will be plenty, while in times of adversity, not one amongst 20. You've read a few books after all, so how can you not understand this concept? Song Jisun was unwilling to relent and he asked, then what about the ancestors of his ancestors? Was there not a single powerful and influential person? Not even a single one. Song Chongjing chuckled and said, oh, so you hope that Chun Ping'an's ancestry is more unique and remarkable? Song Jisun didn't hide his thoughts and he nodded and replied, I'll feel a little better if he's different from ordinary people. Song Chongjing became increasingly curious and he teased, how did he bully you? How did he cause you to have such an obsession with him? But according to my understanding of that young boy, he doesn't seem like a... Song Jisun chuckled coldly and cut him off, interjecting, perhaps people in small areas don't have the broadest of minds or farthest of sight. However, we definitely can't dismiss them as fools. Those who are kind will be sincere and generous, while those who are sinister will be scheming and deplorable. There are also those who will be unfathomably stupid, and perhaps even sinister at the same time that they're stupid. Song Chongjing was even more puzzled and he asked, then which type of person is Chun Ping'an? Song Jisun sighed with vexation in his voice as he lamented. He can't be regarded as any type. He's a genuine idiot. That's why I feel so distressed. Ning Yao squatted in front of the bench and carefully observed Chun Ping'an's sleeping face. Her mind was filled with astonishment. This mystical ability was truly mysterious and unfathomable. Chun Ping'an was sleeping in a strange position, and this caused his entire body to radiate with a sense of natural simplicity. Even though Ning Yao was unable to describe this mystical ability, she had an innate intuition that allowed her to determine whether a mystical ability was constructive or destructive. Ning Yao turned around and asked in curiosity, you're the person guiding Chun Ping'an's cultivation? The old man took several puffs from his smoking pipe before crossing his legs and gazing up at the dark sky and curtain of rain. He chuckled, cultivation? This can be regarded as cultivation? What, had another person with the right to found their own teaching and become an ancestor appeared in the outside world? And because of this, they've caused the cultivation world to decline year after year? It can't be, right? Those few mighty beings aren't running a charity. Since they've already decided to become Taotai themselves, they have no choice but to continue down this path. They definitely won't allow others to take a slice of their cake. Ning Yao was baffled and she asked, Mr. Yang, what are you talking about? The old man faltered upon hearing this. Your elders didn't tell you about the history of these old relics? Ning Yao shook her head, answering, my grandparents passed away early, and my parents don't like to talk about matters pertaining to the other worlds. They're afraid that I'll run away from home. Old man Yang turned around and carefully examined the young girl. In the end, he asked, how many characters are inscribed on that wall now? Many heroic and powerful people appeared during my grandpa's generation, so 2 extra characters were inscribed on the wall in just a mere 100 years. There are a total of 18 characters now, Ning Yao replied honestly. There are 18 characters already, the old man said with emotion. Dao Power, Grand Majestic, and Western Land. Apart from these 6 characters, what are the others? Thunderpool Restricted Land, Eternal Lasting Sword Qi, Qi, Chan, and Dong. Ning Yao replied solemnly. Old man Yang frowned and questioned, Little girl, what about the final character? Did you eat it? I forgot it. Ning Yao huffed. The old man didn't persist, and he asked another question saying, Are the rules still the same? One will have the right to inscribe 1 character on the wall for every Ascension tier demon that they slay. Why do you know so much about my hometown? Ning Yao asked with a frown. Old man Yang smiled and replied, A swordsman came to our small town a long time ago, and he had a habit of recording his travel experiences. In the end he died nearby, so I retrieved his thick travel diary and flipped through it whenever I was bored. Ning Yao was skeptical of this explanation. As if he had eyes on the back of his head, the old man added, It's up to you whether you believe this or not. Ning Yao observed Chan Pingin's condition, and she felt like he was in a state of deep meditation. What's going on with him? She asked. Small death, old man Yang replied slowly. Taoists referred to sleep as a small death. Ning Yao felt slightly exasperated. Old man Yao's words were either vitriolic and grating on the ear or strange and hard to understand. The old man mused to himself, saying, Little girl, let me ask you something. When a person says something in their mind, this is referred to as a voice in the mind. So, who does this voice belong to? Ning Yao faltered upon hearing this, and she fell into deep thought. After a short while, she naturally shut her eyes and gathered her concentration. Afterward, she became extremely sleepy. In the end, her head surprisingly drooped down as she fell asleep. Old man Yang stood up, walking around Ning Yao and stopping in front of Chan Pingin. He pointed at Ning Yao with his smoking pipe and said, Look at her. With just a little guidance and a few words, she was able to immediately advance to the next tier. Now look at yourself. You have shit all abilities, yet you still like to act so stubbornly. What's the point of being so stubborn? Do you think the heavens will fall asleep and accidentally give you some fated opportunity? Old man Yang returned to his seat and looked out at the increasingly heavy rain. The frantic raindrops pitter-pattered against the courtyard floor. His expression became slightly sad and he murmured, After so many years of picking and choosing between so many people, who would have thought that the least hopeful candidate would have the most resilient life? Die. An extremely skinny young boy carried a large basket of wild vegetables and held a string of 7 or 8 small fish in his hands as he walked through the alleys. After entering his courtyard, a rich young boy in silk clothes stepped on a stool and climbed onto the low courtyard wall. He squatted there with no care about dirtying his expensive clothes, and he chuckled, Chan Pingin, you climbed the mountains and waded through the creek to find food again? Your ability to live off the mountains and waters is truly impressive. Can you take me with you in the future? I'll reward you with some copper coins. The skinny boy smiled and replied, You don't need to give me money. The rich boy scowled and said, You can scram if you don't want it. I don't even want to go anymore. The young Chan Pingin pulled the small fish off the reed string. The biggest fish was the size of his palm, while the smallest fish was only the size of his thumb. The young boy got up on his tippy toes and placed the fish on the windowsill to dry. They would be edible after drying, and there would be no need to add salt either. Not only that, but there was also no need to slice open their bellies and remove their intestines. This wasn't because he was afraid of the hassle. Instead, it was because not much meat would be left if he did this. In any case, he found the fish to be crunchy and tasty. The rich boy Song Jisun felt a little regretful after saying those words. In reality, he had always envied his neighbor who was the same age as him. He would always return home with something in his hands, whether that be wild rabbits, catfish, wild berries, or what have you. He was tempted whenever he saw this, and this was an absolute feast for his eyes. However, the stubborn young boy wasn't willing to apologize. After seeing Chan Pingin's adept and carefree movements, he more so felt a slight sense of stifling unhappiness. This Chan Pingin was so poor that he could barely afford to cook, and he was also sleeping in a rundown room that leaked wind from all the different directions. In fact, he couldn't even afford a single stick of candied hawthorn. That being the case, what in the world was he so happy about? Squatting on the wall, the rich young boy was very baffled. Die. One day, the rich young boy who could only live in Clay Vase Alley but didn't need to worry about food and clothes came back home with his face black and blue. His clothes were also covered in mud. Zhuhou had just become his maidservant, and she asked him what had happened. However, Song Jisun refused to tell her no matter what. After going back to his room, he shut the door and lay down in bed. He had argued with someone today and he had even fought with them. Even now, some of their venomous words were still ringing in his ears, causing the proud young boy to feel a piercing pain in his heart. His expression shifted between grief and anger. You just have some shitty money is all. What are you so smug about? You can't even compare to Chen Ping'an. Even though his parents are dead, at least he knows who his parents are. Do you know who your parents are? He couldn't get these words out of his mind. Song Jisun tossed and turned in his bed. Yet he couldn't fall asleep no matter what. The next day, the rich young boy didn't squat on the courtyard wall and chat with his neighbor like normal. Instead, he surprisingly paid a visit to Chen Ping'an's house. He said something to Chen Ping'an, and after a few days, Chen Ping'an left the small town and broke his promise to his deceased mother. He was still very young, but he had already gone to the dragon kiln to become an apprentice. Die. There was a figure sneaking around the back door of the pharmacy, and after catching a glimpse of them, Old Man Yang didn't say anything. He simply turned around, not wanting to dirty his eyes. The sneaking figure felt especially hurt after seeing the old man's response. What hurt him even more was the fact that the woman who he should have referred to as sister-in-law furiously pushed his head aside with one hand. Holding an umbrella with her other hand, she strode toward the building in the backyard. After seeing the old man, she immediately prepared to shout at him. Old Man Yang sighed, and he hurriedly walked out of the building and shut the door behind him. He stood on the steps and looked at the woman who was about to raise hell. At this moment, he even lost interest in his smoking pipe. The woman stopped and placed her hands on her hips, scolding. "What are you doing, huh? Trying to stop a thief? At the end of the day, you're still my man's master, so why are you always doing such wicked things? Li Er was doing just fine as a shop assistant, so what right do you have to fire him and tell him to piss off? Is the Young family's medicine shop yours? Ha! Did Li Er sleep with his master's wife, or did he sleep with his master's darling daughter?" The man who was pushed back over by the crowd shrunk down and hid behind the door. He truly wanted to dig a hole and bury himself at this moment. Just what kind of temper did his master have? Just what kind of temper did Li Er's wife have? How could he not know this? Thus he felt like he would lose a layer of skin even if he wasn't killed. Old Man Yang was emotionless as he said, "Are you done? If you're done, then you can go home and moan in bed. I've heard that the meowing in the westernmost area of the small town doesn't stop all year round. There's meowing in the morning, and there's meowing at night. In fact, there's so much meowing that many people were forced to move." His words seemingly struck a pain point, and the woman's voice rose several decibels as she shouted, "Old geezer, you still have the face to tell me to go home? After losing his job and income, your disciple only knows how to wander around the streets all day long. The roof on our home collapsed 2 days ago, and he can't even scrape together enough money to patch it back up. I was forced to return to my clan's residence with my children, and I suffered all kinds of harassment and abuse. If Li Er weren't kicked out of the pharmacy by you, would our family of 4 have suffered so much grief? Old Man Yang, hurry up and hand over your savings for your coffin and help us fix our home. Otherwise, there's going to be no end to this." The old man wore a cold expression as he looked at the hiding man, Zhang Dafeng. There was grief on Zhang Dafeng's face as he said, "Master, Li Er has gone to deal with that matter according to your instructions. He definitely won't be coming back anytime soon." Old Man Yang's expression became dark. At this moment, Zhang Dafeng felt the urge to fall to his knees and kowtow. The woman threw her umbrella to the ground and sat down on the rain-soaked floor, bursting into tears and crying. "Undying old geezer, have you taken a liking to cheating with your disciples' wives? Are you even going to target me?" Old Man Yang carried a stool over from under the eaves, and he slowly sat down before retrieving some loose tobacco from his pocket and squishing it into a ball. He then placed it into his smoking pipe and started to puff away. He gazed up at the sky and completely ignored the shouting woman. Zhang Dafeng looked at the woman who was crying and shouting in the backyard. The rain was quite heavy, and the woman was also fairly voluptuous, with her clothing also being relatively thin at this moment. As a result, many shop assistants from the Yang family's medicine shop walked over to join the fun. They were all secretly delighted as they enjoyed this feast for the eyes. The woman was crying hysterically, yet she suddenly fell silent at some moment as if someone had grabbed her neck. She rubbed her eyes and hurriedly stood up, not forgetting to pick up her oil paper umbrella as she frantically ran away. As she ran, she screamed, "There's a ghost!" Old man Yang grimaced, saying, "Like rat droppings on an incense table. This is someone detested by both gods and ghosts alike."